My name is Sara Holdren. I am a director and a teacher, and I also am the theater critic for New York Magazine and Vulture. And I'm very, very happy to be here to introduce this new work by the Streetcar Project. So as Michael said, do we want to do a little? I'm trying to make it informal. Like, yeah. Who are you?
We are a small commercial theater company that believes that all you need are great actors and a great text to tell a great story, and we have an ethos to pay working class actors a living wage, and we made a production of Streetcar Named Desire, as Michael said, with 4 people that we'll tell you more about in a bit, and we are starting work on this second piece, and that piece is currently touring the States, and we'll talk about that more in a bit, and we're currently starting to work on this piece which is Orpheus Descending.
And your name is?
Nick. I'm Nick.
Yay. Awesome. So Nick Westrate, one of the founders of the Streetcar Project, along with
Lucy Owen.
Amazing. And then we've got some of the beautiful performers here too, who we'll introduce in a little bit, I think. But so the format of this evening is that I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Then you're going to get to sort of dive into the work that these artists have been doing here this week. They've been in a residency at Coffey Street. They've been getting into this new Williams piece, Orpheus Descending. They've been working on music, on scenes, and they're going to do some of that work in front of you. And then after that's done, we'll talk.
Great.
So just to give you a little bit more introduction, so at this point the Streetcar Project has been talked about a bit, but just to fill it out a little more, Nick and Lucy founded the Streetcar Project sort of during that first 2 years of pandemic insanity, in an effort to recenter the actor in the theater making process and to explore a kind of process that really relied on long-form rehearsals, as Nick said, on hiring working class actors and on paying living wages, and on really stripping back stagecraft to essentials. At this point, the actual production of Streetcar Named Desire that he's talking about has been performed in an airplane hangar in Los Angeles, a barn in upstate New York, a movie theater, a Baptist church, a designer boutique in Soho. It's this really, that's where I got to see it, in the designer boutique in Soho, and among other spaces this show has gone to. And it's a really incredible experience because the idea is to go very minimal aesthetically, but very visceral performatively. That Streetcar, as Nick said, featured 4 actors, no props, no sets, was constantly adapting to these changing locations. And now the project has turned to another Tennessee Williams play, Orpheus Descending. And Orpheus Descending, I'm gonna give us a little bit of background about the piece. Williams first wrote a version of it called Battle of Angels that was actually a pretty early play in his career, and that is a very, in a weird way, it's both a forerunner and a post-runner to Streetcar. Battle of Angels really shares a lot of themes with Streetcar, and then he reworked it afterwards into Orpheus Descending, so in a way it kind of spans and holds Streetcar, and there's a lot that the plays are in conversation about with each other. So just to get into it a little, to give you a little bit of background on Orpheus before they dive in. So Battle of Angels was written in 1940. It was only Williams' 6th play and the first play that he actually ever successfully had produced, but also successfully is a questionable word there. He wrote the central role of Lady Torrance, who we'll hear a lot about, for Tallulah Bankhead, but she turned him down flat and reportedly said, "The play is impossible, darling, but sit down with me and have a drink." They did produce Battle of Angels in Boston in 1940, but according to Williams, it failed spectacularly, and the city council tried to shut them down for quote-unquote lascivious and immoral content, which is just far too appropriate to the events that are happening in the town of this play, so, So Williams shelved the play for a while, and then entered the 40s on maybe one of the craziest streaks a writer has ever had, and produced Glass Menagerie in 44, Streetcar in 47, Summer and Smoke in 48, and by the early 50s he was very much had this play Battle of Angels back on his mind and wanted to rewrite it into something new. it's so, but at the same time was also writing, the Rose Tattoo and Camino Rail and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So, like casual. But by 1957, he had reworked Battle of Angels into a new play called Orpheus Descending, which premiered on Broadway in that year, directed by Harold Clurman. And notably, I find this really interesting. It's a play in which Williams returns to a phrase that he came up with sort of early in his artistic life, in which he really loves, the phrase "the fugitive kind." His second play, actually, from 1937, is called "The Fugitive Kind," and he brings back those words in this play, Orpheus Descending, and that idea of a kind of branch of humanity that will always be on the fringes, that will always be in flight and in danger and kind of misunderstood and judged and feared by the more settled citizens of the world, the people that, in the words of one of the characters in this play, are the ones who are bought and sold. So, to tell you a little bit about the characters in the play, and then it'll be enough of me and we'll see them. Orpheus Descending is the story of, it's one of those, there are only two stories. Someone goes on a journey, a stranger comes to town. It is a stranger comes to town play. So it's the story of a young musician named Val and the small, restrictive southern community where he lands when his car breaks down. And Val is the play's Orpheus. He wears a snakeskin jacket and he carries this almost sort of magically imbued guitar, and he comes along with this very complex past and with a kind of like undeniable animal magnetism about him. And he descends into this sort of dangerous, narrow-minded hellscape of Two River County, this southern county. I have no idea whether Williams is referring to when he calls it Two River County, whether there's like a Styx and Lethe reference in there, but yeah, but it feels right. But so he finds himself in this town, in this general store that's owned by an invalid named Jabe Torrance and his wife, Lady Torrance. And Jabe is sort of haunts the upstairs. He's this cruel, jealous, dying but not dying fast enough husband. And he's a kind of Hades in the play, sort of the Lord of Hell. While his wife, Lady, is a kind of Persephone. She's this figure of light and life and potential who's been shackled to this kind of living death. And the play charts the development of their relationship. Val and Lady sort of discover kindred spirits in each other, and Val begins to work in the store, and then the buzzards of the town are kind of circling around them. And the other interesting thing is that they aren't the only sort of aspiring spirits in the play. One thing that Williams wrote when he had finished turning Battle of Angels into Orpheus Descending, he wrote, "On the surface, it was and still is the tale of a wild-spirited boy who wanders into a conventional community in the South and creates the commotion of a fox in a chicken coop. But beneath that now familiar surface, it is a play about unanswered questions that haunt the hearts of people and the difference between continuing to ask them and the acceptance of prescribed answers that are not answers at all." So what's fascinating is that it isn't just Val and Lady in the play asking those questions. Along with those two, there's also a character named V. Talbot, who's the wife of the local sheriff, and she's fascinating. She first sort of seems stuffy and sanctimonious, but then turns out to have these sort of blinding holy visions. And then also kind of centrally and most wild of all, and a character that you'll see tonight, there's Carol Couture, who's this sort of untamed younger daughter of a local aristocratic family, and she sort of haunts the town. And I don't, it's the way in which he's overlapping with Greek myth, I think, is, loose and flexible, but in a way she sort of feels to me like this, like a Eurydice figure, sort of someone who's longing for Val to take her out of hell. But yeah, so that's where we're at. That's Orpheus Descending in a rather large nutshell. And then I think the last thing that's important to mention, just because we'll probably end up talking about it after the scenes, is that it's also a play, not unusually for Williams, that's really imbued with questions of racial and gender violence. In a very similar way to Blanche, the character of Val has been a sex worker, and that is both veiled and, our knowledge of that is both sort of on the table but also veiled in the play in the same way that it is with Blanche. lady is in the original text is Italian, and her father died a horrible death, essentially a lynching death at the hands of these awful, this mob of awful people who are still very much present in the play. And her race as an immigrant is constantly thrown in her face. Her father's fate is constantly thrown in her face. So these sort of currents of violence are also very present in the play. And I know that there's a really wonderful, interesting casting concept that you guys have been working with that we'll sort of talk about once we get into it, that is in conversation with some of these questions of like, who's telling this story? Yeah.
Okay, so amazing. So I think, do you have a preference? Should we rewind and talk a little bit about Streetcar Project first and then get into this? Yeah, let's do that. So just, we've heard a little bit, but can you both tell us more about like, it came out of this moment in the pandemic, in the shutdown of theaters, in the sort of total turnover and in many ways crumbling of a lot of institutional structures. Just like tell us a little bit more about the origin of Streetcar Project, like what kind of work you set out being interested to make, why, fill us in a bit.
Sure. I'll start, I guess, and then I'll quickly pass it on to Nick. I'm Lucy. In A Streetcar Named Desire, I play Blanche, and it came out of it was a bleak time, early pandemic days, and I hadn't worked in a while, and I was in despair, and so I picked up my favorite play as a little gift to myself. It was just a little balm that I gave to myself, a sweet little gift was that I started reading my favorite play and thinking about my favorite character, Blanche, who I think is maybe the female Hamlet. She's hard, and she's beautiful, and she's terrifying. And so I spent some time with her, and then I started working on it in my living room, and I invited 3 friends to read it with me. And then after we'd read it together a few times, I invited Nick, one of my favorite actors in the world, and my favorite collaborator. We'd done another play together. We invited him to come and just hear us read the play out loud, again, in my living room. And then Nick and I began a conversation about what it would mean to keep working on the play, originally just for ourselves, just as a way to satisfy our creative hearts, and as a balm in a tough time. And so that was the origin, and you can take over now.
And then it was, it's one of those things like, right, a friend of ours who is a very dear friend of ours, who's our first funder of the Streetcar Project, our dear friend Ryan Hill, who is our partner in this as well. He was like, oh, well, let's just pitch it to a theater. We'll just pitch it to a theater. And we'll just tell a theater you want to do A Streetcar Named Desire. And I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. So I'm going to walk up to the Guthrie Theater, and I'm like, hey, I'm Nick. I'm an actor. I want to direct Streetcar Named Desire, and I have a Blanche. Oh, also, she's not an Oscar winner. So ready? Can we go? It's just not how it works, in the American theater. So we basically said, we made this little agreement that we would only work with what we have, which at the time was nothing. So it was like, oh, we have nothing, so we have to use nothing. So we started rehearsing, and we, the first couple times we used a little bag of props, and then we all felt like we were in acting class and wanted to kill ourselves. And so it was like, okay, well, what does it mean if we use no props? And then some bad Southern accents started, and it was like, oh, we don't have a dialect coach to do this properly. What happens if we do the play with no accents? And so that's what we started to do, and it unlocked the play in a very particular way. And then one thing that's great about that play is Tennessee Williams really scores. The characters live above a bar that plays music, live music, so he really scores what songs are going to be playing. So at a certain moment, the stage directions will read, the blue piano rises to a heartbreaking crescendo. And I was like, well, we gotta have that. And something I do have is a Bluetooth speaker and a computer. So I could find a heartbreaking crescendo, and then I went into this kind of insane space where I turned myself into a sound designer and just started becoming obsessed with jazz music and blues music and we use some Japanese heavy metal now, and like the soundscape we ended up building, because that was something we could bring with us. The idea was like, we have to be able to do a Streetcar Named Desire on the one train and make it interesting, because the one train may be the only place that everyone will let us all on. And so we started doing that, and then we did a workshop. A friend of ours gave us their barn in upstate New York, and we did a workshop there, and we invited like 20 people, and they were all like profoundly moved. And this is after we've been rehearsing for a long time, so all these actors, for no money, learned this entire massive script, you know? And then we did another workshop at Baryshnikov Art Center where I invited a lot of designers who are friends of mine who we had both collaborated with a lot. And I was like, okay, great, we'll do this for the designers and then they'll tell us what to do, right? Because the actors are always the last people allowed into a process. Like when you're an actor, you show up at a process and they're like, okay, this is the set, this is your costume, your character wears this kind of shoes, you're gonna walk in from over here, and you're like, oh, great. And you kind of have to figure out how to get a little sliver of your soul in there, you know? And we thought like, well, what happens if you start with the actors? And so, and then that was the original idea, and then we would invite the designers, and my very dear friend Dane, our very dear friend Dane Laffrey, who's a brilliant set designer, said, oh, you don't need me. You need to do that wherever anybody will let you. And so that's what we've done. And each time we did the show, someone at the show would say, I have a movie theater. I have a shop. I have a backyard. And like we did it in Kathy Chalfant's living room, you know? We've done it, we really did, like the whole show. And it's just like Lucy and I developed a philosophy of walking through open doors. So when someone would open a door and say, can you do this? The first answer is yes. And then we figure it out. So we've done to this point, like, I think something like 21 unique bespoke stagings, including like 3 stagings in 3 different spaces on Yale University's campus. We're gonna be performing in a empty carousel house in Asbury Park, New Jersey on the Jersey Shore this summer. We've performed in an airplane hangar, a warehouse. We performed on the patio of the biggest villa I've ever seen in Pasadena. The idea is like, what if actors were like a string quartet and we could show up and play the music and disappear, kind of like afraid of ghosts, you know? You just would come in, haunt the fucking space, and leave. But these actors like live not only with this entire massive, terrifying text inside of them, they also have to learn a new roadmap every time. And so it's very discombobulating, and you can speak more to that.
It's discombobulating initially, and then it's really exciting because it's powerful. It's good actors with the best text. It's such a good text, and we do rob our actors of some of the things that and these guys can speak to this if they want to once we move over to Orpheus, because we take a lot of things away from actors. We do not have props almost at all, and so when Mitch shows Blanche his watch with an inscription, the watch is in his eyes, or he is the watch. And so initially, I think for the actors, it's startling because you're robbed of all the anchors that you usually have as an actor, and sometimes you're robbed of behavior that you hide behind. And so it really is just you and the text. And what it allows the actors to really live inside that text and make themselves the living monument. And then also it allows, I think hopefully our hope is that it's an offering to our audience. We intend it to be quite generous. We want you to have your own experience of the play and to get to imagine what Blanche is wearing, because I'm just wearing this kind of raggedy old dress. That's not raggedy, it's Rachel Comey. But that's because I work at Rachel Comey. And then
Where the show was performed.
Where the show was performed, yes, which is why it was performed at Rachel Comey, because she said we could do it. You will have to imagine Stanley unpacking a box full of Blanche's furs and her jewels, but then you get to have this. You get to have an experience with the play that is unlike anybody else's, and it's totally yours, which I think works.
And like
hopefully.
in this era where we're so visual, we spend all day looking at images. We found that the audiences, a lot of the times, it's like this release where they get their mind's eye back. And it wasn't until we were doing it for a while that I realized that we were doing what Blanche advocates for in the play, which is the life of the mind and the imagination. And I believe myself to be something that I am not. And through this belief, through this imagination, I'm able to survive the hell that I'm in.
It always really strikes me the way that Tennessee Williams in so much production in the American theater has been so weighed down by realistic detail, considering how clear he himself is about I don't want realism, I want fantasy, I want magic, and just like, and in the lines of the, even in, and we were just talking before this about how in the stage directions of Orpheus Descending, many times he uses the word unrealistic. He's pushing towards something else, something abstract, something other, and somehow his plays have gotten sort of trapped in this mid-century group that tend to be very, very realistically expressed.
Yeah, it's like, they were finding the group theater and method acting at that time, and so like you have all these scenes, like Jessica Tandy was going insane with Marlon Brando on Broadway because it would take him 5 minutes to light a cigarette because he was just lighting it in the most interesting way and thinking about all sorts of fascinating things about his childhood while he was lighting the cigarette, and she just wanted to say the next fucking line. It was just like really off the line behavior became fascinating. We became fascinated by rough men who were just sad and behaving and not saying lines. And the thing that the greatest compliment we get with our Streetcar is that so many people have come to us and said, I never knew this was a play about two sisters. Because society tricked us into thinking that's a play about a sexy man. And it's not. He's in 6 of the 11 scenes. Blanche is in 11 of the 11 scenes. And Stella's in 8 of them. So it's like, it's really a play about two sisters who experience sexual trauma really early in their childhoods, and they're trying to find a way to talk to each other about it. And the tragedy of the play is that they can't communicate with each other. Anyway, sorry to get emotional about that. But the really cool thing about this process, and we're so blessed to be here at Coffey Street, is that we developed this in this very organic, like friends way, like we had all worked together before, we all knew each other, like we weren't afraid of each other's mess. And now we're starting a new process with brilliant new actors who we actually had a casting process for, and another brilliant actor who's here, the great Dale Souls. And so now we get to take what was like a very organic, discovery thing and try to talk to and communicate it in a cogent way to new people who we just started working with on Sunday, which is kind of wild.
They just did these 2 scenes, having just met and just started working together. So,
So I'm curious to know how it's been for you all this week.
Well, I have one of these, so I'll start, but I want to hear your opinion for sure. I will say that, to your point that you've all touched on, this idea of realism in some ways robbing us from the universality of this text and from Williams generally, it was something I was really fascinated by. Having worked in both very realistic theater and then also physical theater, let me back up and say, I think it's no mystery to anybody here who's working in the arts or the creative field that there's a little bit of a crisis going on. Did you all know this? But particularly in the theater, I think everyone's asking the question of how do we capture attention? How do we sustain attention? How do we speak into a fractured landscape culturally, but also just in the attention landscape? How do we capture people? And one answer that people are turning to is more money, bigger things, fancier names, and that's all well and good, and I wish them well. I think we all certainly do. But at the other end of the spectrum, what I was so fascinated by is this group of artists asking the question, what if we take the timeless, the universal, which is mostly just our bodies, our voices, words, sounds, and see what can therefore be created. It's terrifying. I think as an actor, you probably see it, those of you who are not actors, in things that you watch on TV. Actors are fascinated with the props because it grounds you. It makes it feel like the reality that you're creating is real. And so they're smoking cigarettes, they're touching things. And it's ultimately just a crutch. And what I think the question that you both are asking is, but what if there are no crutches? And to your thing, in this show, we have a couple of letters. There's a couple of objects that we don't have, and you have to just tell the story without indicating the story, which is ultimately what, as actors, we should be doing anyway. It's an amazing way to work. It's a real gift.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Michael said, and I'm so grateful to be here, and it's been so much fun, and so yada yada, wonderful to work on the play. But I think one thing that, like, specific to this style of working for me, that's been like the kind of personal one aspect that I've been really working on this week, is, treating the language as heightened text. I mean, when I first met with Nick, he was saying, we're treating this like it's Shakespeare, or it's some kind of heightened text. So, you can't like mumble and paraphrase all your words or something. So being on your voice and working on the language in a very kind of attention to alliteration and the poetry of the language, which is something Lucy has talked to us a lot about with her experience with Streetcar, and using the punctuation to find the characters' thoughts and the sort of logic of what they're saying and thinking at a given time, has been really fun for me to be working in that way. Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
There is it's so exciting to hear that. This is maybe just my own sort of hobby horse, but as a person who teaches actors, college, grad school level, like, one thing that I find very disturbing about American pedagogy is the total running away from style, and from height, and just a complete sort of, you'll encounter actors pretty far along in their school careers who really are afraid of going anywhere other than what they sort of perceive as relatable. And it's really encouraging to hear that there's a kind of, the thing that I feel like I'm sort of always saying to people is, like, you have to expand your idea of what is truthful. You have to expand your idea of what is in the soul, that because there's more there, and Williams is a poet. This language is more similar actually to Shakespeare than it is to you flipping on your TV to watch HBO.
Well, and he, like, the reason we were able to do it is because he names the things. Like, Stanley says, "Sister Blanche, I got you a present." Really, Stanley, what is it? A ticket, a bus ticket on the Greyhound Tuesday. He doesn't just go.
Which is actually also very Shakespearean. Like,
Very
you
Shakespearean.
say what you're gonna do, you do it, you say what you did.
And that's because they didn't have props at the Globe, and they didn't have that shit, and so they would just say it. And there's something about him just walking forward and saying, "a bus ticket," and giving that to her with his sounds. And it is like, I have this thing, like, the people who know the most about the play are the actors, because until you run the sounds through your body, you actually have no idea what's going on with the character. Until you've had to breathe that deep to make that long of a thought, that's the only way to know, is by making the sounds. And we've kind of made the sounds the only game in town. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. For me, coming to this piece as both a musician and an actor, the musicality of the text is like Shakespeare. I think Lucy, you made this point in rehearsal one day. Similar to Blanche, Carol has these long sentences that really get at her state of mind and also just how intelligent she is. And it's very contrasted with some of the things, especially with Val, that are very short and to the point and sort of trying to hide, which I think is really interesting. But that sense of musicality that I think often American actors, to your point, Sarah, are often a little afraid of, and we'll clip it when we ride it and trust it. there's so much more meaning and realism than we could ever hope to find.
And actually, the text requires it. If you're going to do Williams, the requirement of Williams, I think, is that it's big. Their feelings are huge, and so you have to have a ton of breath in order to achieve the length. Blanche is so brilliant. In order to achieve the length of her sentences, I have to work out like my life depends on it for weeks before we start rehearsing because she's so brilliant, and in order to achieve her level of brilliance, which Tennessee Williams gives you in his text and punctuation, I have to work very hard as an actor. Actually, I mean. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Well, and it also strikes me like that, and what you were saying earlier strikes me as not like the brilliance of the character, but also this sense that I think Tennessee Williams puts in these characters of being untethered from the earth, you know, of being like there is that Val in this play in Orpheus Descending has this remarkable part where he talks about a kind of bird with no legs who never touches the ground, who just flies and flies its whole life and sleeps on the wind, and you sort of don't know. The Lady Torrance, the character he's talking to, says like, I think you're making this up, but I wish there were such a bird. So you kind of don't know, but it's such an analogous moment for me to Blanche's talk about butterflies and about like people who, you know, the sort of light people, this idea that it's also something in the language that like, you know, if it isn't nailed to the floor, will float away from the sort of violences of the earth.
Right.
There's so many, I mean, sorry that we're just kind of freewheeling here, but there's so many, we hope to, the idea is that we would tour these two plays and rep with each other, and mainly because there's so much overlap, as Sarah was saying in her preamble to this evening, that and it's really stunning. I mean, they're both plays about two sex workers. Blanche uses literature and poetry to transcend her situation. Val uses music. They both, Lady Torrance's father is murdered on Moon Lake. Blanche's husband shoots himself on the banks of Moon Lake. Lady Torrance talks about her father's orchard in spring. Blanche tells Mitch that he can remember her name because it means an orchard in spring. There are all these echoes, and the more we work on it, we just like hear these echoes between. They really are sister plays in a way, and they're just both really about the violence that is perpetrated against women in society. And yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the casting idea?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So with this production, we're using, or the idea is, you know, it's not a production yet. This workshop, the Greeks had a structure of 3 actors and a chorus. And so in this production, we have 3 actors playing Lady, Carol, and Val, and then a chorus of 4 women playing everything else. And so the idea of it was a play with this much racial and sexual violence in it was to kind of remove to give the story over to people who would have been the victims of sexual violence in this town, who would have been women and a male prostitute. And Tennessee had a very Christ-like thing about him. He was only interested in, you know, the poets and the whores and the downtrodden and the disabled and the poor. Those were his angels.
I was annoyed with myself earlier because I can't remember the author, but there's an incredible short story called "The Ring of Brightest Angels Around Heaven" that is about that is more set in the AIDS epidemic in the 80s in New York, but it is literally, I feel like he's so drawing from Williams. It's about all of these people either sick or on the streets, but this is like the story builds to this being like this is the ring of brightest angels around heaven. And this is like, it's so similar, I think, to Williams's conception of, there's another thing that feels so akin between the plays are these ideas of purity and corruption and what society perceives as corrupt, as opposed to what is true corruption of the soul.
And like Blanche has to constantly wash herself clean.
Yes.
Val says that his guitar washes himself clean. Like there's a lot of, it's also very beautiful when you bring up angels and the AIDS crisis. between our first and second workshops of Streetcar, I went and did a production of Angels in America, and the number of Streetcar references in Angels in America is insane. And I was being chased by Blanche. I mean, Pryor says, get out of here, I'll never stop screaming.
Yes.
And Blanche says to Mitch, get out of here, or start screaming fire. And they both have these men who are not helping the situation, and they literally have to scream in their faces to get them the fuck out of the room.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, but so this idea of working with 7 actors, and no, go ahead. Oh yeah, just so working with 7 actors, and I think also it also feels like though there is something in Williams's play that like moves toward that Greek chorus effect. Even like the play begins with 2 of the sort of women of the town, kind of, like all 4 of them, sort of setting the scene for us. And I think, and you were just talking about how in Battle of Angels, it's even more of a kind of explicit frame for the play.
Yeah, in Battle of Angels, they have turned this store into a museum, and it's 20 years later, and they have tourists who are coming in. They're like, let us tell you the story of Lady Torrance and all of that.
Yeah, but even so, in Orpheus Descending, it does feel like there's this kind of, that chorus structure feels in the fabric.
I think so, and we're working very hard on it and figuring it out. Figuring out what that means, and that magic of that actor magic of transforming right in front of the audience's eyes with no mustache or anything to do it other than your essence, other than your voice, other than your body, to shapeshift.
And maybe, I'm just jumping, but maybe because we got to hear some gorgeous music tonight, and because music is also so important in both plays, we can talk a little bit about that. I know you were sort of talking about the differences between a world that Williams very specifically scores with sort of music coming from below versus a real musician in the space.
Yeah. It's we have this in Streetcar. The music never stops except when Blanche and Mitch are together. But we play music through the whole thing, and then it's really great to have Michael, who's a virtuosic musician and a music director, and to wonder is this maybe a live music show? It's not yet because we're not there yet, but maybe it is. Yeah. So we're exploring that as we rehearse, and the next workshop may just be a music workshop. Yeah, to build that.
Yeah, I mean,
To just add a little bit to that, it's interesting to me, you sort of touched on it in the intro, Sarah, that it's not a real one-to-one to the Orpheus myth, but obviously in the Orpheus myth, there is this idea that music is maybe going to be the salvation. Obviously, we know it is not, but it's interesting how in this play there's the opportunity to say, hey, well, maybe that's similarly involved.
but it could be. I mean, I think that's part of the sort of tragedy of it, is that it always comes so close. I mean, there is something in multiple moments in this play where at least in my memory of reading it, where even characters that surprise you that they would sort of have a moment of being moved or have a moment of granting grace, are sort of momentarily affected, and you kind of think something might break. But
Yeah, another thing, and we are very sad to miss her tonight, but I kind of originated this idea of doing this piece around an actor named Aysan Celik, who's very brilliant and due to health reasons is not able to be with us tonight, who's playing Lady Torrance. And before actually we started working on Streetcar, Aysan and I started working on Orpheus because I know that racism against Italian people was a thing in the 1950s. I know that was a very, very real thing. Today, it doesn't hit me in a visceral way that I understand so much. And the last time this play was done on Broadway, it was Vanessa Redgrave. And so a whole night about people being racist to Vanessa Redgrave, I don't understand. I can take the imaginative leap. I can go there, but and Aysan and I had been long-term collaborators, and I was like, oh, I do understand racism in America against a Middle Eastern American woman, and that has become worse and worse and worse and worse and worse in our country over the past 7 years. And so we were just like, what if we just use a Arab American woman to be in the play and not change any of the language, which is like a big ethos for us, which the estate really likes. We never change a word. We never change a word. But just to put someone there and like see if that that immigrant experience is translatable. And that's still, an open question to us. But yeah, Aysan has been a huge collaborator on this process, introduced me to Michael. So we're very bummed she's not here tonight, and we hope she's better by tomorrow.
Are you, this is, maybe it might be too early on to know, but are you, because of that ethos of not changing a word, are you experiencing anything as you get into this play where, I guess like sort of discoveries you're making, like are there moments where it feels like that's a challenging thing to encounter? Like how do we feel our way around that? Where does it feel present? Where does it feel stuck? Yeah.
I mean, it's always hard, and you always get to like passages of text and you're like, what the fuck is this? And then we just like push through it rather than changing it, or just let it be weird and let it just be like a thing that's said in there are lines in Streetcar that we were saying forever that we were like, I have no idea, but we have to say it right now. And so we're just, I mean, because we don't use the poker players in Streetcar, like Stella takes on a lot of this language and she ends up like talking a lot about like the music playing on the radio. And like, so Stella like seems like kind of drunk and she loves the music, but like it just, the audience can only see Stella saying it.
Right.
So they don't know that it's from another character necessarily. So yeah, so it's a bit malleable in that way, and the world becomes a bit different.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, okay, let's see. So, I mean, I guess one thing I should say is, I always like it when people do this. What am I not asking you that you would like to be asked?
Oh
Is there are things that,
Good question. I'm a Pisces.
Perfect.
Michael, we were all wondering that.
No, I
He was
actually
he was playing the music earlier, and the whole company turned into the town of women, just like gaping at him and being like, "Wait, do you play the saxophone too?"
No,
It was terrible.
This is going to sound like a very shill move, but I want to say that, when we were talking about stripping things down, we talked about the body, the voice, but I have to give honor to this space as a participant in the work. And thank you to wherever you are, all the people that, have made this possible, because again, there is a certain aesthetic that says any and every firecracker and magic trick and whiz bang that we can put in, let's do it. And again, that's all well and good, and that serves a purpose, but to just be in this space and to just hear how it sounds in silence, and then to break that silence, there's a certain something we understand about the way the space sounds, and then you just look at it and you have these wooden beams. How old is this building? Someone here knows that. 1870s. Yeah, wow. 1870s, right? Wow. And so it's like this would have been old in the world of the play, right? Yeah. This would have been something potentially that they would have seen. And, again, like this wood, this brick, these textures, I'm not gonna say timeless, because obviously there was a time in human history before all this, but it certainly outdates anybody in this room. And I don't know, there's something about that has been really beautiful, and a real gift to not have the ice cream store that we're talking about, or the shoe store. Like, it's just, this is what we have, and this is what we're looking at. And you've both really insisted that let's not pretend that this isn't where we are. This is where we are. Yeah,
you're here. But also, like, to have space, going back to like the talk of like where we are in this moment in the theater, like to have organizations like this that give you the space and the time to work is so hugely valuable in New York, and to perform, and I don't know where we're going, but we wouldn't be able to get there without spaces like this. Yeah.
The kindness of strangers.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but and I guess just spinning off that really quick, although we may be close to the end. This may be implied, but are you envisioning this as a similar to Streetcar, it adapts to its space over and over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, we've found like a good structure for Streetcar. We like to be in different spaces. We will, in 2026, be in a theater for the first time, which is going to be crazy. And the question is, how do you treat a theater as a found space? But yeah, we're interested in this circle of chairs being something that is a way that we watch this play, and yeah, we'd like to do it everywhere. And I think that's the joy of not being tied down by a lot of physical elements, is that you can do it everywhere, which is maybe what we need to figure out how to do. It's just like going back to the string quartet thing, right? Like actors just sit around and wait for someone to let them do a thing. Whereas like my musician friends, I went to school with lots of musicians, they don't like not play Ravel because no one has asked them to, They like play it all the time. They play all the music all the time. And we as actors get this psychology that we can't ever speak this text unless like Lynn Meadow has called our agent and asked us to come to do a reading for $50, like it's just a fucked up mentality that, and it's like, Stockholm Syndrome, right? Yeah. Like we have taken on the language of our oppressor and we do it instead of just being like, what Lucy did was like, fuck this, I'm gonna do this play in my living room, which loads of people do and then never follow through on the project, right? And it's like, we can get together like a band and gig out and do this text if we decide to learn it. And we don't need a set, or we don't need to GoFundMe for $68,000 to do it. We raised a little bit of money to do this, but to pay people's salaries so that people could come here, not to like build a pool in the middle of the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about anything specific.
Some trauma there?
But if you were offered a pool, it would be amazing at a pool.
I mean, we did it. When we did it at that villa in Pasadena, there was this big pool, and whenever Blanche would go to the tub, Lucy would go down to this pool and like kick her feet and giggle.
Yes.
Because there was just a pool there. We had to use it. It was there. I wouldn't like choose a pool, but if someone paid me to go do it around their pool, which they did, we did it.
Amazing. Oh, I think, it feels like we may be drawing to the end, but also like, are there questions? I don't know if I don't know if I'm supposed to do a Q&A segment, but yes, okay, great. Let's do it.
So what's interesting is like I've read Tennessee Williams, and a lot of his stage directions are very specific, and in a way that it gets in a way of the story. I've always felt that, like but they're very specific, and when you do his work, usually they're very specific on how you do the production of those works. So I'm just curious how you're getting around that, because, you didn't do Glass Menagerie, but like the opening of that is so intense with the way that the lighting is and every stage direction. So I'm just, how are you not having to do all those weird stage directions?
I think that sometimes those stage directions are really useful and informative, and sometimes we ignore them. That's the truth. We just ignore them sometimes.
But do you mean in like a logistical way with like the estate of Tennessee Williams? Yeah, I mean this.
Had to include all that, which sort of like
The estate of Tennessee Williams definitely protects his material very well and strongly, and I think it is the small nature of our company that makes them be like, well, yeah, they can do that, and we never change a word, and we are just like, we want to say the full poem in front of people as many times as possible. And I think they kind of see us as like a concert of the show. I don't know, I'm not in their minds, but they do, we have a great relationship with them, and we really get along with them.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to say, like, it's so refreshing, because now, as a person who, instead of reading it, can really just hear the words, which are so beautiful, and you don't have all the excess sort of getting in the way of this story of these human beings.
Right.
And they're sometimes all that stuff gets in the way, you don't even see all those things.
Yes.
The things that people are feeling. So very exciting to see.
And I don't know it seems to me, I mean, there's a production of Streetcar from Britain that just came to BAM, who's also really eschewing a lot of stage directions, and so I don't, it may be, I don't know for sure, but that the estate is slightly more lenient on stage directions than it is on text.
And
know.
And Ivo did Ivo Van Hove 20 years ago did the glass bathtub.
Right.
Blanche, Elizabeth Marvel was naked and dove into the glass bathtub.
Yeah.
So like
It feels like they're not quite the Beckett estate in terms of stage directions.
So for those who maybe have not read, may I just?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay, so this is not unusual, and this is not even long. She makes an odd, awkward gesture, almost crouching in a bow to him, but her eyes blind. ... Val looks at her as if he were trying to decide between a natural sensibility of heat and what his life's taught him since he left Witch's Bayou. Then he sighs again with the same slight, sad shrug and crosses to the alcove to put on his snakeskin jacket and remove a cheap suitcase with his belongings. Now, that's probably been edited down.
Yeah, by me.
They're so specific.
But it's so beautiful what you said, though, about like hearing the human voice is so important. It's often why I hate these things. But like in the preface to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which is also, I don't know which came first, Val's speech, probably Val's speech, but he kind of articulates it again in his preface to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. He says, personal lyricism is the cry from prisoner to prisoner from the cells in which each of us are bound to live our lives. And so like, and Val says a different version of that in this play, but this idea that only through our poetry could we ever really reach into that cell that each other are in and communicate something. And the idea of stripping all that away so that we can all be in the same room and be hit by the same sound waves is like a little bit of the ethos of what's up. Sorry to get off mic for that. I was making a point.
I think there was someone over here, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about figured and staged violence in this play, and the fire, and you have a beautiful red spot tonight. But yeah, how you're thinking about traveling it, and death on stage in a pool or a beauty parlor or a...
We definitely have not gotten to that yet.
Cool.
And I have no fucking idea.
So I can't wait to see it, but...
I know my friend Daniel Fish just directed this Electra in London, and he did a very cool silhouette hanging of Stockard Channing as Clytemnestra, and he was like sending it to me, and I was like, oh, how'd you do that? Like, come and steal that from you. But no, I have no idea. It's like, we kill Blanche in kind of we don't really kill her, but we, it will be not realistic, and it will not be, there won't be fire, and there will be sounds. There will be sounds and something else, but I don't know yet. Cool. Lou, do you know?
I didn't. Yeah, I figured this out. But there are, I guess, in Streetcar there's a rape that we have done in I think it's in the same way for a while now, and it happens with music, and it happens in a way that it is violent, but it's not literally violent. It nods at violence, and yeah, I guess that's all that I'll say about it. You're gonna have to come see it, but you go ahead.
Wait, and also the hit, it's very interesting in Streetcar, Tennessee asks for, when Stanley hits Blanche, she demands restage directions that be off stage, which is super helpful for us because we also can't afford a fight choreographer. So that's always off stage. So we always, when we get into a new venue, we're like, okay, where is the hit? And we find that door that they're gonna run out to make that happen, which I always love about Williams. He was like, I don't need to see that. Yeah. I probably saw it he probably saw it too much. But But yeah, the rape was a very interesting. Is a very interesting.
Well, and there is a death on stage at the end of this play, but there's also a death off stage that is possibly even more horrific, and that is presaged by one of the things that struck me in this play is these moments of hearing the sheriff's dogs pursue convicts, and the characters talk about hearing these dogs run after fugitives and tear them apart. And so it already feels like Tennessee, again, in his own sort of not realistic way, has worked this sort of score of unseen violence into the play that then resurfaces at the end. So, it feels like there's something in the sound
Right now,
world.
it's a sound. It is a sound world.
It'll be an oral experience.
The Hounds of Hell.
Yeah, exactly.
The Hounds of Hell,
Yeah.
the baying of dogs
Yeah.
exists between almost every scene of this play. He asks for the sound of the baying of dogs,
Yeah.
which is quite terrifying.
Yeah. Are there other questions out here? Amazing. Well, thank you. You all are so amazing, and it's been such a privilege. And thank you to Michael and to everyone else at Coffey Street, this incredible venue. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you very much.
I've only ever directed a play at SUNY. I mostly teach it. I do a class in